Here we go. Okay, everyone, welcome. I'm Chris Abramson. Welcome to the Note the Past podcast devoted to memorial subjects, memorable subjects from eras gone by. We hope to have guests come on, like our guest today, to talk about their experience and passion for things that have shaped their life and our culture. Be sure to subscribe to the icon by pressing on it below to be notified of future episodes. Today, I'm humbled and honored to have Ben Fong-Torres as our guest. Ben is a legend in the world of pop and rock and roll music in both AM and FM radio, and as a journalist, having achieved superstar status as a writer and editor for Rolling Stone magazine. In the late 60s and 70s, Ben was the source. In-depth interviews with our favorite rock heroes and deeply researched articles on subjects shaping our culture. Who doesn't remember his random notes in 2020 news? They were often my first stop in the magazine. Ben was also a DJ on KSAN Jive 95, a pioneer freeform FM station in San Francisco. And he's won several Emmy Awards for co-hosting KTVU telecasts of the San Francisco Chinese New Year's Parade. He has written several books, including The Hits Just Keep On Coming, The History of Top 40 Radio, which will be the focus of our conversation today. And Ben is also a man of the community, contributing his time and resources to raise funds for community organizations in need. I encourage all listeners to watch the documentary, Like a Rolling Stone, The Life and Times of Ben Fong-Torres. Here it is right here. Let me hold up. Can you see that, Ben? Do I have that okay?
I see it. That's the right one.
Okay, great. It is informative, moving, and a treasure for anyone interested in the impact of the music of our lives. So, Ben, thanks so much for being here today.
Mon plaisir, Chris. And I'm happy that I'm taller than you. Different from most of my interviewers.
I got to tell you, Ben, this is a little intimidating, interviewing the man who transformed the interview into an art form. So please bear with me. We could talk about a ton of things based on your storied career, but we're going to focus on Top 40 radio and the transition to FM radio.
Oh, okay.
So why don't we start with that, and maybe drawing from your book that you just held up, and I'll hold it up again. It's my Bible. In your preface, you talk about Top 40 radio, as being liberating or a liberation and entertainment for youth. Could you expand on that a bit?
Well, even before rock and roll and Top 40, radio could be liberating for younger people. Once they realized that they could find something like a transistor radio, something portable, something they could get away from the living room, where traditionally families gathered in front of a big console, bigger than TVs would be for years, and tune into programs as decided by their parents or other adult figures. And so with a portable radio, they were able to then hide or just simply be in their own bedrooms and listen to their stations with their music. And when Top 40 came along in the mid-50s, that meant that they had independence from their parents' rule, authority, and tastes. And they began to hear new music and embrace new heroes, ranging from pop artists that in Top 40 early on, they played everything, meaning they played mom and dad's music. Yeah, they would play that. But also they played R&B, they played country, they played comedy, they played at some point one hit record in the Top 40 era was the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Another would be the Chipmunks. It was all over the place. And that's where kids wanted to be. They wanted to be more adventurous, discover new sounds. And among their heroes were their disc jockeys. Now, instead of, Ozzie and Harriet or pop stars like Tony Bennett or the McGuire sisters, now they had somebody who spoke with them, to them all over the radio, and they were local. They were guys that you could go and meet at a dance, a sock hop, or any other public event that the DJs might go out to and hand out free records and stuff. And so they have their own hero that they could actually listen to, telephone, and pose with at an event. It was a whole new world of entertainment for teenagers, and it was all through the radio.
Through one of these, Ben, do you remember your first transistor radio?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I had a bunch of them.
Oh,
We
were
wore
great.
them out. Yes.
Well, Ben, so let's switch and talk a little bit about top radio history here in the San Francisco Bay Area,
All right.
which is near and dear to your heart because you have quite a story to tell about KEWB and certainly your knowledge of the other top 40 stations in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what propelled the book, Hits Just Keep On Coming. That was to go back to the very beginnings of Top 40 Radio. And in San Francisco, it was a station called Kobe, Koby, got to be known as Wonderful Kobe. My older sister and brother listened to that probably quite avidly. But by the time I came along, a couple of years later, to enjoy Top 40, Kobe was near its end, and a new station had started in Oakland, my own hometown. And so that was KEWB. And they carried on for a good number of years, and I became a big fan. And it kind of it sort of mixed in with my own ambitions to be, if not on the radio, at least on a microphone of some sort. So in high school, in my senior year, around 61, 62, I became Commissioner of Assemblies. And by that time, I had met Gary Owens, who was, of course, the big superstar, along with Casey Kasem, out of the Bay Area into Los Angeles. And I began to use my role as Commissioner of Assemblies, where I produced a program every month, and I would bring in Michael Jackson, the British all-night talk show host on KEWB, who had been Michael Scotland playing Top 40 hits on KYA, the rival station in San Francisco at that time. And so I would bring DJs in, and of course I wanted to just meet them. And so I was able to do that and double up with them entertaining the students at my assemblies. And so I got hooked on KEWB. Of course, Gary Owens and Casey Kasem and a few other heroes of mine moved on to Los Angeles and other markets. But then KYA came along. It had been there all along, but as I got into college in the mid-'60s, I discovered some great talent there. Chief among them, a guy who called himself Russ the Moose, Syracuse.
Remember him well.
And he did, when he was tossed into the all-night slot as kind of punishment by the authoritarian general manager because he refused a promotion to become program director. He said, I'd have a lot more fun just being in jail on the all-night show than I would having to run programming and deal with all the other DJs and sales department. And I don't want that. So he got tossed into the Who Scout and turned his all-night shift into the all-night flight with your captain, Russ Syracuse. And he created these imaginary characters and bits, and he sang, and he was, as I was writing my book about Top 40 and thinking about Russ the Moose, I realized that he was the entree into freeform radio, that he was doing it without the whole hippie thing going on around him, without the ballrooms in San Francisco. And he and Sly Stone, who did 2 stints at R&B stations, KSOL and KDIA, had that independence, that spirit, that bravery to defy management and just do their own thing. And as long as they got a listener base, what could the boss say? It's working. So even though you're breaking the format, you're doing stuff the other guys aren't being allowed to do, but you've got the numbers and the advertisers are happy to have you make fun of them. Whatever it was they were doing, they got away with, and that really drew my attention because that's what I was looking for. Just entertainers who were not afraid. On the TV side, there was say Steve Allen would be one, and the reason for that is because he created his own characters and had a review of comedians and did a lot of hilarious skits that you would never see on, say, Ed Sullivan. So that's pretty much what radio meant to me. Was just the jumping into the lesser known and the lesser accepted, and with a great soundtrack.
Steve Allen had that great laugh too, didn't he, Ben? When it was just infectious.
Yes, he would do his letters to the editor, I think it was,
Yeah.
break up. And he also had this thing where he would sometimes go, Spock, Spock. And
You
one
remember
of the
that?
highlights of my life was when I was hosting a variety talk show on our public station, KQED FM. And we brought in guests, mainly musicians, but also authors and media personalities and dancers, politicians, whoever. And one time we got Steve Allen, and he was in town for a humor convention. And so we sat side by side. I told him that I loved him, and proved it by asking him questions and telling him stories that got him saying the cliche, you know more about me than I do. And so then we wound up doing Spock, Spock together. And I still, that's one of my, I'm so sorry I didn't get into the documentary, but we didn't have video of Fog City Radio. So,
Oh, geez, that is
but still
fantastic.
a great moment.
But you did get, in addition to what you've just described, you did have a position for a period of time at KEWB, didn't you? Didn't you go in and pull sports reports off the wire?
I don't know how it happened. It might have been after I had made contact with the first DJ I got onto my assemblies, Michael Jackson. Mm-hmm. And I had written a parody of What's My Line to introduce the student cabinet, about 10 fellow students. And so I got Michael to come in as the mystery guest who would sign in on a blackboard and sit there with a mask over his eyes. And then and that part was real. They didn't know who he was, and they had to guess. And so we ad-libbed the last part of my parody. But I think through Michael, I was able to hear about this. It's really more of an internship than an employment. I know they paid me something, but it was to go in on Saturday afternoons and pull college football scores from the wire services quarter by quarter and handing them over to Jack Morris, the weekend newscaster. And so once every hour, I suppose, maybe more often, he would tell the scores of the various major college ball games going on. And I would just be at the AP or UPI wire machines filling out charts to tell him what's going on. But on occasion, I could wander off and meet Don McKinnon, who was a replacement for Gary Owens after Gary had gone to Los Angeles to downtown Burbank. And so I got to see and sense and smell radio close up. That's quite a thing to be able to do when you're still in high school. So wow. I was very lucky.
Was there quite a bit of a competition between KEWB and KYA during that period of time?
You know, being in high school, I would not be privy to industry gossip or that kind of talk. But yes, there had been rivalries between Kobe and KEWB, and then between KEWB and KYA, and then ultimately between KYA and the Bill Drake takeover of KFRC, which had been a middle of the road station, and suddenly RKO gave Bill Drake the reins, and Bill had been on KYA as a very boring morning man. He was just a straight guy, and it turned out he was working out his programming list to reduce a playlist from, say, 40 or 50 or 60 songs down to a tight 20 or 30, and minimize DJ ramblings, and hired just a couple of major personalities per station. He was programming 4 or 5 stations ultimately, and even more later on. as he created his own consultancy company with Chanel. Anyway, KFRC came along, did the anti-KYA format, tightened everything up, and took over. And so by that time, I knew enough about radio to know what was going on there. But early on, as a fan of color radio, KEWB, Channel 91, I had no clue. I just knew that I liked who I liked, and I was an Oakland booster, so I tried to stay true to KEWB.
Yeah, and Bill Drake that you mentioned, as you write about in your book, I mean, he was really someone that took that top 40 format and really screwed it down, didn't he? And took it down to Los Angeles, to KHJ or something, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. And he might have started in Fresno, got to the Bay Area, went to Los Angeles, and RKO had a chain of, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 stations, and so he took over all of them, including WOR in New York. And I think that's when he hit the big time. But that's when he started getting the media notice. He had done very well with Los Angeles radio, and he took the real Don Steele, who had been at KEWB. He took Robert W. Morgan, who had been at KEWB. You know, he had an ear for radio talent and transformed Top 40 radio.
Well, speaking of that transition, let's talk a little bit about, freeform FM radio along about, I don't know, 67 or something, maybe coinciding somewhat to your joining Rolling Stone, I guess, at that point, 1967.
Yeah, it's all a mess there, that part of the story.
So
but,
what caused that? How did that come about?
Well, radio quite often, especially popular radio, commercial radio, is quite often cyclical. That is, that one strain of music or approach in terms of personalities takes over for a while, and then another strain comes up that is different and therefore pulls its own audience who are tired of what has been going on and have become kind of establishment and commercial. Top 40 had become commercial and establishment, even though they were playing pop rock music. And so with the maturation of a generation of people who were now suddenly impacted by the Beatles and by the Stones and by Bob Dylan, a new attitude came forth, and it was right in line. They kind of served as an initial soundtrack to what would become known as the 60s or the Summer of Love. And the Beatles, Dylan, and the Stones, and others, the Who, the Kinks, Eric Burden, in my view, influenced a whole bunch of young would-be musicians who had begun on guitar, acoustic guitar, begun with a love of jazz music, had a interest in folk music, and therefore message songs. All of that combined, and especially led by Bob Dylan, to a new sound. And it was a sound that was not being played on the radio. And so along came the alternative. That was a very long established but underused, under-recognized band called FM, which brought with it stereo. And so suddenly you had a chance to be exposed to the more mature music, but still pop and rock based, but adding blues, jazz, country, Indian, any number of strains. And again, you have the situation where while it was fun to watch the Stones and the Beatles on TV, the Airplane, the Grateful Dead, Quicksilver Messenger Service, Country Joe and the Fish, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Sly and the Family Stone, and pretty soon Santana were all, for us anyway, lucky us, local. You could actually just go on down to Sutter Street or to Fillmore and Geary and see them. Sometimes 3 of them on one bill.
Wow.
So Bill Graham was just like Tom Donahue with radio. Bill Graham was a pioneer, along with Chet Helms of the Family Dog, in the presentation of concerts. And so again, it was the alternative to what had been going on with pop concerts, which was either some shyster lugging a PA system into town, hiring one band, and then a bunch of local bands who had no hit records, and that was a concert with horrible audio systems and no concern at all for the paying audience, versus Chet Helms and Bill Graham and others later on who thought of the audience first. And he thought of why were they successful. Bill Graham, because of the benefit that he helped to produce for the San Francisco meme troupe, and discovered that the airplane drew a lot of people, and they were standing around the block. And Bill, the light bulb came on and said, "Wow, I think we
Wow.
should do this again and raise more money for the meme troupe." But at the same time, it's money was in that sentence, and so he had a new career and grew
Yeah.
better for it. So radio was the kind of the soundtrack to it, and yeah, people all glommed onto FM radio for the music and for the freedom of the disc jockeys to say and do almost whatever they wanted to.
And just as KOBY was the first top 40 format station in the Bay Area, wasn't it KMPX and then KSAN that really were sort of the beginnings of
Yes,
FM freeform radio?
right. It was KMPX. There was and they were a barter station. It was so lowly that people paid to go on. You know, they didn't pay DJs, program hosts, nothing. But organizations, including some foreign language ones, would buy a block of time. Well, this cat man named Larry Miller was a big music fan. So he said, "I'm going to take the all-night shift. I'll sell my own advertising, and they'll pay for me to be on the radio." And so he was right in tune with the year before, the Summer of Love, which was to us the actual Summer of Love. It was a year before the media took hold of it. But he did that. And at the same time, Tom Donahue, who was at KYA, Big Daddy Tom Donahue, and had become an entrepreneurial force around town. He and his partner, Bobby Mitchell, had a Tempo newsletter, kind of a radio trade sheet. And they produced concerts. They, at least Tom did, built a nightclub called Mother's in North Beach. And their concerts included what turned out to be the last Beatles paid concert at what was then Candlestick Park in August of 1966. So they were big powerhouses on the pop scene. Tom Donahue, however, was also a smoker and a friend to psychedelics at that time. So he was hanging out with some radio pals and his gal pal Rachel Donahue at I think their apartment in North Beach, and started playing some music from albums. And at one point, someone said, "Why can't we do this on the radio, man? That's what we want to be playing and talking about and spreading." And so Donahue started making probably Rachel started making phone calls up and down in the phone book for call letters, and just landed on KMPX and found out what their situation was and said, "Wow, we got a live one here. They have no programming, and so let's go down and talk to them." And Donahue wound up programming KMPX, and then by dint of sister station relationship with a station in Los Angeles, also wound up overseeing KPPC, and it's turned into freeform radio. And that became such a sensation that when KMPX went on strike, then created KSAN, the same thing happened in terms of KSAN having a sister station in Los Angeles. So the Donahues took over what became KMET, the Mighty Met. And so that was your first strongholds of freeform radio on the West Coast.
So as you and I talked about by email briefly, I lived in Southern California for a while, and huge follower of KMET, KMET. I mean, just I couldn't get enough of it. And B. Mitchell Reed, who was one of those disc jockeys that was able to transcend both sides. It just seemed he was an incredible. He had an incredible voice, announcer, played great themed tracks. And then Rachel Donahue with her Blue Plate special at noon every day was terrific.
Well, the thing about Donahue and other programmers who came along and made the FM band such a success for album rock, they called it, progressive music, freeform, whatever the title was that they really had great ears, not just for music, but also for radio talent. And or simply for people who had done radio and could handle the assignment of playing these album cuts and all of that. And B. Mitch was one of them. On in San Francisco, Donahue drafted Ed Mitchell, who had been one of the early boss KFRC DJs, who turned out to be a complete head, and Bob McClay out of KYA. He had been a DJ and program director at KYA, primarily a PD, but he was a buddy of Donahue and Mitchell's, and so he landed a slot on KMPX and then KSAN, and he turned out to be a fantastic disc jockey and one of the masters of a new art form on radio called the segue, of finding a song to follow the song that's playing so that it melds in and it meshes in thematically or musically, however. And sometimes you would just hear a song and then suddenly be aware that this is a different song. You moved on to something else, but it's the same tempo, the same key, and the same theme or whatever. And so all of us try to do that at KSAN, and all the freeform DJs around the country probably took stabs at it. And there were many masters of segues, including I heard one time Frank Zappa was incredible coming up with segues, and that
Oh, no kidding.
makes total sense. Yes.
Huh. Huh. So you had mentioned earlier that Donahue had produced the last Beatles concert, and in your documentary, you mentioned that you were there. I
Yeah.
was there also, but I
Uh,
was in the cheap seats. I'm wondering where you were, Ben, during during
well,
that
I
concert.
hate to brag, but I was actually on stage right behind Ringo, telling him when to hit the drums. Um, I had scammed my way in because I had a little column in an Oakland, what they called a shopper, a newspaper that existed mainly for the supermarket ads they were able to sell. And so I had convinced this very conservative publisher that I could bring in younger readers by writing a column. I was kind of, kind of gossipy, and so I used that to approach Bob McClay, I think, over at Tempo Productions. That's the news sheet that they at Donahue and Mitchell, and I just scammed my way in. I write for this paper in Oakland. It's called the Lakeshore Times, and my column runs every issue. And I'm a big Beatles fan and would like to be able to cover this. And so they sent me a admission letter and a backstage pass, and so I wound up in the press box
Wow.
at Thick Park, looking right over, basically seeing second base, which is where the stage was,
Right.
noticing things like how George Harrison had white socks on, and wrote it up. I did my thing, and that's my experience with the Beatles.
Wow.
Who knew that a couple of years later I would be at Rolling Stone interviewing Paul McCartney and touring with him, and the same thing with George Harrison, Mr. White Sox, and so that's how the world turned for me.
Again, for any of you that want to hear these stories in more detail, watch this documentary. It's all there. And look at that young Ben Fong-Torres. How cool is that photo? Hey, so Ben, before we wrap up, I just want to talk about two last things. One, you mentioned writing several times, and in high school with the assemblies and writing, and now with the shopper, you were with Pacific Telephone for a period of time writing before Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
What a work ethic. Where did that work ethic come from? How was that instilled in you?
I think the work ethic came from being trapped by my slave owner parents in our restaurants as kids. From the time we were able to just, mine ourselves in the rice room behind the restaurant in Chinatown, Oakland, all the way into a restaurant in Hayward, the Bamboo Hut, which was right during my high school years, I had to be at the restaurant or other places of work between my parents having restaurants. I would then work at another restaurant. And so that was the work ethic. It was also the family responsibility that, even though you may moan and groan about it and say it's unfair because our friends, if we have any friends, are able to do this and go there and have a summer vacation and have a party, and we were at the restaurant. And so although we or at least I, whined about it in my radio voice growing up, uh, we knew that it was our responsibility. We did develop a work ethic. I was forced to do my homework in a compressed amount of time. Um, and that may have led to my being able to meet deadlines. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a chance to read because the Hayward Library is only a block away. And so I was able to get humor books and albums and listen to classical music, listen to Broadway musicals, and listen to the clever rhymes of Rodgers and Hammerstein. It all was in there. And so, although I have often used a very simplistic response to people saying, "Oh, why did you become a writer?" And it was just because I loved reading the writings of other people. And why did you become a radio person? Because I loved what I heard on the radio and wished I was inside that big box, being part of it. And so when I had my first uh, um, entrees into that medium, I took advantage of it, with the weekend sports um, score bit and commission of assemblies and so then and then I reported on KMPX and the strike that took place that led to their landing at a former classical station, KSFR, and it became fully KSAN Jive 95 because I covered the KMPX strike. One day, the program director called me at Rolling Stone, where I was compiling random notes and writing the feature stories and stuff, and told me basically that Tom Donahue was going off to do a movie of free concerts around the country in a magical bus and he said, oh, by the way, he's taking a couple of our weekend jocks with him, Island Melvin and a few at Reno, Nevada. And so it occurred to him that he needed a couple of fill-in DJs. And so on our phone call, he said, didn't you do radio? Haven't you done some radio? I said, yes, I did. I did. I didn't tell him exactly what it was because it was the all-night shift on a beautiful music station, KFOG. And so that was in 1967, the summer of love. I'd be freaking out with my friends and then jumping into my car at about 11:15, race down to Ghirardelli Square, into the clock tower and start my 6-hour
Wow.
announcing shift. And so I said, Paul, yeah, I've done radio, FM radio. And so he said, okay, please, can you come in for the month of July 1970 and just do 4 weekend shifts? And that'd be great. And so I did. Of course, I jumped at it. And then, as it turned out, several of the part-time DJs never returned. They got lost in Europe and the Himalayas and whatever. And so my little 1-month gig lasted about 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So now you have a situation of 6-7 days a week I'm writing and working and touring and editing Rolling Stone, being the music director, music editor, and then on the weekends, or sometimes a guy would call me in the evening and say, hey man, I can't make my all-night, my shift tonight, the all-night guy. And I'm just it's too weird, man. And so and they knew I was in town and not far from the station. And so I would go in and do 6 hours after having worked all day at Rolling Stone.
Oh my God. What a work ethic, Ben. Well, listen, can we just close with, clearly in reading your book and reading articles about you and seeing other interviews, you've been writing about rock and roll music. It's been your passion, and how the genre has shaped our culture. When you look back, how does it feel to have been part of 2 radio evolutions and revolutions, AM top 40 format and FM freeform album-oriented rock.
Well, it feels as wonderful as you, being a fellow lover of radio, might think. But to be honest about it, I was not part of the top 40 evolution. I was only part of it as a fan who was lucky enough to get up close and personal with a couple of the personalities. And then to have been here in the Bay Area during that tremendous, tumultuous cultural, political, social, and musical evolution into the 60s and the summer of love and the new form of radio that came about because in answer to it. And so I was there, a listener. And then, yes, I was lucky enough to have a show and to live freeform radio. And I feel great about that. And I'm grateful that I had at one point two of the best jobs you could have at the same time. And so I know that I'm a very fortunate son, as John Fogerty would say. And I know it doesn't end. Oh, yes, this is the end, my friend, of our interview. So, yeah, I do think that I was very fortunate. And yet at the same time, I'm aware that there had to have been a work ethic at the foundation of it, an appreciation of the written word and of communications. And so that's all I can say, is that I have had a incredible time of it, and still am doing it. So I'm a lucky guy.
You are, and I am one of your heroes, have been for 50 plus years. Love writing about you. So happy that you answered my email. I can't tell you how grateful I am, Ben, and thanks so much for taking the time with us today.
All I can say is never again, Chris.
Thanks so much, man.
I'll send you a few things that are connected to what we talked about, and you can feel free to show them on your site. Okay?
Great. Thank you so much. And have a wonderful time out in the beautiful sunshine with your wife and your puppy. Take care.
Marty. Okay. Thanks, Chris. Take care.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.